Well, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. This is great. Great space, beautiful day.
Yeah, although it is 5 to 3. Do you see this? Little concerned that we're all running behind.
That's how we do things in Chicago. We were just talking before this got started. You have ample roots here in Chicago, so I know you've been in the Beltway for a long time, but...
I do have a lot of family from Chicago. I've been saying that really, I have a lot of business reasons to be here, but you also cannot get wet Italian beef in D.C. I'm just putting that out there. I mean, Portillo's will send you a kit. It's not the same.
That's true. Well, on behalf of Cranes, I'd like to thank your partnership in doing this, and then thrilled that we're the first city in what sounds like will be a multi-city show here, so that's great. So let's get into it. You know, to kick off today's discussion, just want to talk to the audience a little bit. Tell us what brings you out here to Chicago right now and everything happening.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first I think we should all take a minute and hold in our hearts our friends and all the businesses in Florida. I mean, what a morning they're all waking up to, right? And I think about that because that's how the U.S. Chamber was formed. It was great chambers like Chicago who came together and said there should be a national business group. And so when we think about anything happening in the country or in the world that impacts families, communities, or businesses, the U.S. Chamber tries to be right there to help. Mm-hmm. So our members are, sure, 80% of the Fortune 1000 and what you would expect of hundreds of thousands of small businesses, but really the DNA is about chambers. Chambers in the United States, 130 AmChams overseas, trade associations, just a real federation of people who believe, no matter what party they belong to, what they believe is that a job is good for a community, is good for our country, is good for health outcomes, is good for environmental outcomes. And so what is it that we can do as a business community to help job creators do what they do best? And Chicago's doing a great job of it, right? We have 8 board members in Illinois. We have members in Illinois that represent 18 industries and $500 million in revenue. And that's on the big side, right? But if you look at the small side, the business startups, the record business startups in Chicago and in Illinois, I came here to see that, to feel the energy, to see the innovation and what you're all building, and to learn what we can do to be more helpful.
Right. You know, back in January at the annual State of American Business event, you kicked off this theme of competition. Had a series of events around that. We've obviously been through a massive disruption and continue to see the effects of that. So talk a little bit about what you were trying to achieve with the competition theme.
Sure. I mean, I think competition's at the heart of free enterprise, right? It's really at the heart of democracy and the founding of our country. How do you compete to get the best ideas into the marketplace? And I love to meet entrepreneurs who say, I have an idea. I have something I can make better. I want to compete and bring that to market. So as I said a second ago, that's my job, is to figure out how to create the space and protect the space for people to do that. I love watching the competition for ideas win the future. You know, we have big, complex problems that we're facing, but we can do it. We can find the solutions. We can find the answers through the spirit of competition, right? But also, we made that the theme of the speech because we're worried about it. And we're seeing a fair amount of government intervention where we don't need government intervention. We don't have a stagnant economy. If you look at Neil Bradley, he uses my favorite example. You'll hear from him later. But we were at the White House after they released a pretty anti-competitive agenda and talking about how they're going to go after mergers and acquisitions and what they're going to do and that anything big is bad, and as if anyone's ever built an airplane in their garage, right? I mean, we need big and we need small. It's an ecosystem. But we're at the White House and Neil says, you know, when I was growing up in Oklahoma, my dad had 2 choices of beer. 2 choices. But today you walk down the beer aisle, and how many beers are there? And yet beer is one of the industries that the White House targeted as not being competitive enough. So part of creating the space for job creators to do what they do best is also making sure that government isn't overacting.
And beyond sort of the growing threat of anti-competitive policies, what are the other issues the Chamber is facing right now?
You know, what we hear from our members around the country is, and I'm waiting to see if anybody nods, is a real worker shortage. They can't find workers, they can't find skilled workers, they can't find any of the trades. Nobody can find truck drivers. Nobody can find software engineers. So a lot of worker shortage. Although we were surprised when we had a bunch of state and local chambers in town last week, it's usually worker shortage first. And for the first year, the first thing every geography across the country mentioned was crime. So we're hearing about supply chain, we're hearing about energy, we're hearing about trade, all of the things that you would expect us to hear about. I think the surprise entrant this year is crime.
You know, obviously Chicago's facing its own challenges around crime. Can you talk a little bit about businesses' role in trying to fix that problem?
Sure. We just did a poll of small businesses. More than 50% of small businesses say they were a victim of shoplifting in the past year. 46% of them said they were raising prices as a result. No American family needs anything more inflationary right now, right? So this is a real problem for families and communities and businesses. But maybe more worrisome, we hear a lot of CEOs talk about an inability to keep their employees and customers safe. And we're hearing about it nationwide. So what can we do about it? We can demand that our government do what it's supposed to be doing, which is to protect us. At the local level, we need prosecutors to actually prosecute these crimes. At the state level, we need state laws that impose criminal penalties. 40 states have lowered the threshold of what it takes to be a felony. So we're watching organized retail crime with videos of this. Shopping cart, calculator. If the threshold for a felony is $1,000, I can ring up my calculator till I get to $9.99 and walk out of that store scot-free. So I think, I'm looking at Courtney, I think Illinois was a state that actually lowered the threshold for it to be a crime, right? So you're on the right path there. But then at the national level, we need to do some things to make online marketplaces safer from stolen goods. So I'm sure none of you have ever been in a pawn shop. But if you go to a pawn shop to sell something, they're going to require an ID. They're going to make sure that if it turns out that that good was stolen, that they can find you, that they can have a clue to solving the crime. That doesn't exist online. So the idea of knowing who the seller is, there's a bill called the Inform Act that we'd like to see passed. So better prosecutors prosecuting crime, harsher criminal penalties, lower thresholds for a felony, and making the online marketplaces a safer place for sellers.
Obviously, another issue near and dear to every company's heart is what's going on in the world of energy. The war in Ukraine overnight turned that into an incredible challenge for businesses going forward. So talk about what the Chamber can do to push on that issue.
Well, you know, when you think about Ukraine, I mean, at first I think we had this philosophical, you know, watching this democracy be invaded, this unprovoked aggression, and it was so heartwarming, wasn't it, to see the United States and all of our allies come together in such a united way, the silver lining of maybe reuniting and strengthening NATO in a good way. We have an AmCham in Ukraine, and we were hearing from him daily about what was going on the ground there, and it was just terrifying. So first and foremost, I think it's protecting a sovereign nation from a foreign aggressor as a principle of the world order and the rule of law we all want to live in was really important. Then we started to see these second order effects, fertilizer, grain, energy, and what that meant to an already troubled supply chain. And particularly in Europe, and you're all reading as much as I am about how afraid Europeans are of a very cold winter. But when I was just in Berlin, it was very clear that this isn't just one cold winter. They've got several years ahead of them of figuring out their energy supply. And what that means to the manufacturers who are thinking of leaving Europe because they can't figure out a sustainable, consistent energy supply could further disrupt the supply chains we're all already grappling with. I would say that one concern that I have about this is, do we end up looking back at this time? It's easy for us to look at Europe and say, they never should have relied on Russia. We told them not to do Nord Stream. This was always a bad idea. But I'm hearing from CEOs increasingly that are concerned we're doing the same thing with Taiwan and chips. We can see it coming. We can predict what China's going to do. And are we preparing enough? On energy, you know, we're a great domestic energy producer. And we've got to stop. I'm looking for my friend. We were talking about this yesterday. We've got to stop pretending things are binary. We're a great country. We have a great, innovative, resilient business community. We can do more than one thing at a time. We can grow our domestic energy supply in a way that supports families, communities, businesses, and our allies who desperately need our energy, and we can mitigate climate. In fact, our technology, what our businesses can do to mitigate climate, is probably the best in the world. But we've got to admit that for our own national security, economic security, and the health of our families, we have to produce more domestic energy.
You talked about the reliance on chips in Taiwan. Obviously, there's been talk about onshoring. There's some projects, Intel in Ohio, which has obviously gotten a lot of press. But talk about our global partnerships, and where does the Chamber stand on the priorities in terms of trade right now?
Look, I think most of the people that you want to sell things to don't live in the United States. We're not the biggest, most populous country in the world, right? So we do need trade agreements so that we can sell overseas. We've had 2 administrations in a row that aren't that interested in trade. We can't get a US-UK trade deal done. That makes almost no sense, right? So the question about how you grow trade with your allies and strengthen your allies through trade agreements is important, but also if we're going to have any hope of containing and confronting China, it's going to be through trade agreements with our allies in Asia. So we think the lackluster trade agenda in the past couple of administrations is bad for American families, bad for American businesses, and we're putting a lot of pressure on this administration to step it up.
And what are you hearing from the administration on that?
Not as much as we'd like. I mean, they're optimistic about this IPAF, which is, we liked TPP. We thought that was the way to really confront China. When that fell through, this is a little bit of a shadow, trade alliance, but at least it's something. And in fact, we just sent a letter over to the White House this week about what we could do to put more teeth in IPAF, some more market accessibility to make it actually work. But we're not hearing enough.
Let's just touch on China for a minute. Obviously, a lot to unpack there. Not enough time to do that. But how do you think about that partnership with that trading partner going forward?
Look, again, I think we want to sell things into China. We want to buy things from China. They're 2 big economies. There's got to be a way to do that. At the same time, we have to be able to confront them on human rights, on labor practices, on horrific IP violations and outright theft. And so these are complex issues and nuanced issues that don't lend themselves to kind of black and white solutions. So the question is, can we preserve a piece of the trading relationship that helps Americans get cheaper goods, helps American businesses sell into China, at the same time that we join our allies at a negotiating table to confront some of the practices that are just not acceptable.
Is there a consistent tariff policy you'd like to see coming out of Washington right now?
Look, we think the tariffs aren't working. They're not punishing China, they're punishing American families. The CBO estimates $1,200 a family a year is what these tariffs are costing. So when we make goods more expensive, thinking that American families won't buy them, frequently they don't have choices. So they still buy them. It doesn't punish the country you were trying to punish, and it hurts the American families here. As part of my listening tour here in Chicago, really trying to understand what this very vibrant business community needs, we met with a CEO last night who talked about the fact that he has a part, he manufactures right here, and he has a part that has a significant tariff attached to it because he buys it from China. It's made his finished product really expensive and uncompetitive. His competitors can import fully manufactured goods with no tariff. So he's losing, an American manufacturer losing business to foreign manufacturers because of these tariffs. So bad for families, bad for business.
I want to take it back to the United States for a minute. Obviously, a lot of question about return to work, remote work, how businesses are navigating that very complicated scenario. Question from the audience, which I think is a great one. The younger workforce doesn't seem to want to go back into the office, and it's affecting getting more questions, which is good, so I lost this one.
They look so quiet, but they're typing away furiously.
Exactly. All of a sudden,
hey.
they're coming in. It's like a telethon here.
It's like that old duck thing. They look so calm, but they're with their thumbs under the water. Okay.
All of a sudden, they just went down to their phone.
Okay.
It's affecting corporate culture. Does the Chamber see this changing anytime soon?
Which thing? Will young people want to go back to work?
Yeah, basically that. And if not, what happens to the corporate culture going forward?
I don't know. I don't think any of us know yet, right? I don't know that we've ever experienced such a massive shift all at once. And I think what's so interesting is if you look back to Friday, March 13th, which is largely the last day we were all full-time in an office. And if anybody had said March 12th, okay, on March 16th, we're all going to work at home for 2 years. We would have been like, no, we need a plan, we need a system, it's going to take months to figure it out. But we went back the opposite way, right? We didn't go back on a dime. And so it's given people, in my humble opinion, too much time to think about it, right? In our case, White Claw seems to be part of the solution. I mean, I'm not trying to be brand specific. It could be High Noon, but there's some kind of hard seltzer solution to this. And what I mean by that is we're experiencing something different, and a lot of our members are, which is your youngest employees actually want to be at work. They want to go to happy hour. They want to meet boyfriends and girlfriends. They want to meet friends. They want to be mentored. They want the next job. But they had a problem. And the problem is that your rules are too ambiguous. And so they dress up, they pay to commute, and they get to the office the same day none of the senior people are there, right? So I think what we're seeing as successful is coming back in really intentional ways on days when they can meet people, feel the culture, feel innovation. But if it's randomly going to the office, they don't have enough agency, they don't have enough power to pick the right day. So I think we can get there.
Yeah. You touched on the crime issue as being kind of top of the list for businesses. Last week, the head of the CEO of McDonald's Corporation based in Chicago made a stunning speech before the Economic Club, which we covered aggressively, obviously, for our readership. Just saying that the problem in Chicago is that there is not a plan, and he asked for CEOs in the audience to raise their hand if they thought there was a plan, and very few did. So what is incumbent on local governments to have a plan? And again, where does business fit into that scenario?
Well, and I think if you really listen to his whole speech, a part of it was a plea for the type of public-private partnership it will take to solve this problem. So I think he was really trying to say, let's as a community figure this out. And of course the coverage, not Cranes, but other coverage may have been more dramatic. Not that we ever see that, dramatic media coverage, but the media coverage might have been a little off of that. Look, let's go back to why I don't like big government overreach. Because there is a really serious role for government, right? We want to be safe. We want to have clean water. We all breathe this air. We want food inspection. I mean, there are really important roles for government to be playing. And when they try to do everything, they stop doing the things they really need to do. So part of talking about government overreach isn't simply business wants government out of the way. It's that we need government to do the really specific things we need them to do. And I think public safety's at the top of that list.
Some more great questions coming in, and I'm sure now that I mentioned that, more will come in as well. But what is the Chamber's position on the upcoming elections as it pertains to what's best for American business?
I don't know that we have a general position, but I would say this. Neil and his team spent a lot of time talking to local chambers, local businesses, to figure out where there are real pro-business champions out there. Where there are people who are really willing over a sustained time to understand what it takes to start a business, keep a business, grow a business, and where are those champions in Congress that we should all be supporting to create the environment that we need to avoid a recession?
And then actually a very interesting geopolitical question from the audience. How will the U.S. Chamber continue to work with the London Chamber of Commerce to ease geopolitical issues throughout the EU?
Look, I think we just had, I'm looking for somebody who would know the real number, 40-ish AmChams from Europe in town at one time. And then we almost killed them all because they wanted a picture in front of our building. We're the only building that faces the White House, and we had way too many of them in the street, which is a different story. But we learned a lesson about photography in front of the building. I think the most important thing that we can do as a business community is kind of what you were talking about with the McDonald's CEO, which is how do we all hang together, teach each other lessons, make each other's voices louder, plus one, a lot of what the business community in these different countries are trying to get done. I think you can't overestimate, no matter how much you're reading in the paper, you can't overestimate how complicated the situation is in Europe right now. And anything that we can do to bring the right research, the right grassroots, the right pressure to bear at the top, government to government conversation, anything that we can do to help those economies is really important.
Going back to kind of the local issues that companies are facing, obviously tight labor supply.
Yeah.
Obviously there's been a little bit back and forth. We're seeing that even at Cranes, we're getting more applicants for some of our job openings now, but are you sensing a kind of a changing of the situation where employers are starting to be in a better position when it comes to labor, or is it still, are we going to see this tight labor market for?
I think we're going to see it for a while. I mean, we had a bad worker shortage before the pandemic, and in Chicago alone, there are 100,000 fewer people working after the pandemic than before the pandemic. And we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. It's part of what I want to hear from all of you while I'm here, right? We know some of that is childcare that never reopened. We know some of that is that people figured out they could live on one salary when they weren't sure that they could. We know some of it is long COVID, which is something I don't really understand, but we're seeing it pop up in the numbers of people who don't feel healthy enough to come back. So, but this problem existed way before the pandemic. And again, going back to, we're trying to solve really complex issues with simple solutions. And these things aren't binary. We're a great country. We should control our borders. We should decide who can come in and who can't. We should be generous about that. We should figure out who really needs asylum. But we should be able to make those decisions. And we should increase legal immigration. And we act as if these two things are binary, and they're not. Do you know that Canada has an entire marketing program where they come after our PhDs? Because we don't let them stay in this country. They're not allowed. So we have Canada coming in and saying, come up north, it's great up here, right? So we need to be competitive for talent. We've been working with the Department of Labor, not very successfully, to try to figure out if you're a Mexican truck driver with a CDL and do extra training, could you come into this country if you're willing to take a specific job? Nurses, massive nursing shortage in this country. Could we do some kind of bilateral agreement to get Mexican-trained nurses into this country? It's really hard to do, even in narrow employment categories. So, look, we're going to have to figure out the supply.
So we're coming up to time here. We've talked a lot about challenges. What makes you optimistic at this moment?
You. Right? I mean, I watch businesses all day long solve problems, figure it out against a lot of odds. I mean, who had on your leadership bingo card that you would be in a leadership role in a global pandemic, historic high inflation, this global supply chain, war in Europe, China and Taiwan? But this is the moment that you're all called. You're called to lead your communities and your families and your businesses through this, and I watch you do it every day. So I'm optimistic that we can solve big problems together, and I'm optimistic because of the Chicago business community and because of the American business community.
Well, Suzanne, thanks for coming out to Chicago. Good luck on your beef sandwich.
Thank you.
Endeavor.
Thank you.
Got plenty of options.
Does anybody not eat it wet? I mean, are there really? No, it has to be wet, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
I was just checking. All right, see, this is why you have a listening tour, because you find out things like that.
Thank you. It's terrific.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jim. Oh, no, we're supposed to go this way.